Hello everyone, I'm Steve. Welcome to SA. A diver and his friend have dived into a cave in South Africa which is completely submerged. During the dive they accidentally discovered the diver who had been buried in the cave 10 years earlier, with part of his body buried in the sand. The two divers returned to the hole. Over the next period of time, they call in more divers to try to get the body up. However, the location is 271 meters underwater, which cannot be reached by ordinary divers at all, and it is extremely difficult to salvage. Can they accomplish this difficult task? Next, I will tell you the story. The protagonist of the story is Dave Schott, who was born in Australia in July 1954. He loved aviation since he was a child, and at the age of 3 he made a toy airplane out of cardboard. At 18, he became an agricultural pilot. This year he met a girl, and they got married after a year of dating. Dave and his wife left Australia in 1981 at the age of 27 to settle in Papua New Guinea. This is an island country in northern Australia, across the sea from Australia. They settled there and had a son and a daughter. Dave frequently travels around the world by plane for work. Years later, he became a pilot of an airline in Hong Kong, and his family moved to live in Hong Kong. In 1999, 45-year-old Dave went on vacation to the Philippines with his 17-year-old son. After his first exposure there, he fell in love with the sport deeply, even more than flying. The unique and beautiful underwater scenery and the feeling of weightlessness underwater made him linger. Dave spent a considerable amount of time learning various diving knowledge and skills in the following days. Gradually he changed from a novice diver to an advanced diver with some experience. He was no longer satisfied with diving in ordinary open water, but began diving in wrecks and underground caves. These places are full of mystery and unknown. Dave initially used an open-circuit rebreather, the more common type of respirator that divers expel carbon dioxide directly into the water each time they exhale. But each dive could not last long, which was a pity for the Dave. Dave started working on closed-circuit rebreather in order to stay underwater longer. After the diver exhales carbon dioxide, the closed-circuit rebreather absorbs it, supplements a certain amount of oxygen, and then inhales it by the diver. The advantage of a closed-circuit rebreather is that it allows the diver to stay underwater longer, without the formation of air bubbles around them, and reduces the time to decompression and surface. But closed-circuit rebreather is not only expensive, but also more difficult to control than open-circuit respirator. Oxygen poisoning may be caused by operating errors or irregular breathing underwater, which will be life-threatening. South Africa is located at the southernmost tip of the African continent and is known as the country of rainbows. In Emanzana, South Africa, there is a place called Kamadi Springs. It is one of the most popular diving training locations in South Africa. It used to be a mine, and after it was closed, groundwater slowly filled the mine to form a natural underwater cave. The vertical depth of the lowest point in the cave reaches 186 meters, and the terrain inside the cave is very complex. It is one of the most spectacular inland diving destinations in South Africa, attracting diving enthusiasts from all over the world. In the fall of 2002, Dave came to Kamadi Springs to learn diving techniques. During this time, he met a man named Don Shirley. He is former British soldier who moved to South Africa to learn diving after his retirement. He lives near Kamadi Springs. The two began diving together. Dave has been diving for several years, and he has a strong learning ability, so he quickly mastered the skills of using a closed-circuit rebreather. A year after coming to Kamadi Springs, he broke the record for the deepest dive in Kamadi Springs, successfully diving to 186 meters underwater. In order to challenge deeper dives, Dave purchased a rebreather called MK15.5 through a special channel. It was developed by the US Navy for the evacuation of personnel inside submarines, and it was the world's top rebreather at the time. Over the years, Dave has become an experienced diver. In June 2004, Dave and Don had known each other for 2 years and established a deep friendship. They often dive together and Dave is already very familiar with the terrain of Kamadi Springs. He is eager to break his diving record by diving into other deeper underwater caves. One day his friend Don introduced him to an underwater cave in the northern Cape province of South Africa. It is the largest and least populated province in the country. There is a well-known underwater cave called Bushman's Hole. Its deepest point is 283 meters above the water surface, making it the third deepest freshwater cave in the world. Bushman's Hole is at the base of a steep cliff with the mouth of the hole under a small lake. A layer of green duckweed floats on the lake. This is a schematic diagram of the non-virtual cave. The whole cave is shaped like a vase. The deepest point of the cave is 283 meters from the water surface. After entering the lake, you dive for 3 meters and you will arrive at the entrance of the cave. The tunnel here is narrow, and only one person can pass through at a time. The tunnel after entering is relatively spacious. After diving for more than 40 meters, you will come to a huge inner space, where there are no creatures, only endless darkness. Bushman's Hole was discovered by an amateur diver in 1977 and has since attracted countless divers from all over the world. In 1996, a Portuguese diver named Nuno Gomes reached the deepest depth of the cave at 283 meters and won the Guinness World Record for deep diving at that time. It was springtime in South Africa in October 2004, and Dave and Don were planning to dive into Bushman's Hole. They came to the lake to prepare for the diving. The lake is covered with a layer of green duckweed, which is very beautiful. There is nameplate near the lake reads, "We miss our son, who brought sunshine and laughter into our lives, but happy times so short." It was left by the parents of a victim in the Bushman's Hole. A 20-year-old diver named Dion Dreyer dived into Bushman's Hole 10 years ago with friends. When he reached 50 meters underwater, there was an accident, and his partner was too late to rescue him, so he sank into the depths of the cave. A salvage company dispatched an unmanned submarine to search for him underwater, but could not find him. In memory of Dion, his parents left a plaque at the entrance of the cave in the hope that divers would bring their son out once they reached the depths of the cave. This nameplate also warns subsequent divers. Dave and Don saw the nameplate and learned the story. Dave is quite confident in his diving skills. He has more than 300 dives and has a wealth of experience. Not only that, but he will also break his diving record here and dive to the deepest point of the cave. Dave changed into a wetsuit and put on a Mk 15.5 rebreather and 6 cylinders. He dived first and soon he came to the entrance to Bushman's Hole 3 meters below the water. It's dark inside, and there are a lot of guide ropes inside. With these guide ropes, he won't get lost. Dave descended slowly. He was on a closed-circuit rebreather, so there were no air bubbles around. There was silence all around, and some time after Dave's dive, his friend Don also dived into the water from the lake. He will wait at the entrance of the cave to help Dave, who has decompressed, stop and floated up. Dave reached 270 meters after a period of diving. The water pressure here is very high and cannot stay for a long time. Once the stay time is too long, the time for decompression stop and floating must be extended. Here is a brief introduction to decompression stop. Divers experience 1 atmosphere of pressure for every 10 meters they dive. So divers are under great pressure in deep water. If you float too fast, it means that the surrounding pressure will drop rapidly, and the gas dissolved in the body will form bubbles in the blood before it can be excreted with the breath, resulting in the appearance of decompression sickness. This is very dangerous. Dave attempted to continue the dive to the deepest point of the cave at 283 meters. When he came to 271 meters underwater, suddenly a body in a diving suit was found not far away. The body lay quietly at the bottom of the water. Dave remembered the nameplate he saw at the entrance of the cave. That was Dion Dreyer, who died here 10 years ago. His head and hands were exposed to the water, leaving only dry bones, and the diving mask was still fixed on his head. Part of his body was buried in the sand, and Dave tried unsuccessfully to drag Dion out of the sand. After a while of exertion, mud and sand were raised around him. Due to the force just now, Dave's breathing rate increased rapidly, which is the most taboo thing when using a closed-circuit rebreather, and it will be very dangerous if it goes on like this. But Dave has experience. He quickly calmed down and adjusted his breathing. Dave had been underwater longer than planned at this point, and the situation could become very dangerous if he didn't start to float. He then tied a guide rope to Dion to record the location. Then Dave began to slowly decompression, stop and floating. Dave spent a total of 9 hours and 40 minutes in the water, breaking 4 of his own records. He also found the remains of Dion, who died 10 years ago. After the two left Bushman's Hole, Dave contacted Dion's family and promised to bring Dion back to the ground. Deep water salvage, this is a whole new challenge for Dave. His friend Don was deeply worried after hearing about it. The remains are at a depth of 271 meters, where the water pressure is very high, and the salvage work is very risky. Dave also knew the dangers of action, so he didn't act rashly. He then returned to Hong Kong from South Africa, and he and Don agreed to go to Bushman's Hole again in January of the following year to carry out a salvage operation. Dave and Don spent the next month in contact almost every day via the internet. Since most of Dion's body is in the dirt, only his head and hands can be seen. If the buried part is not decomposed due to environmental problems, it will increase the difficulty of salvage. For this reason, they also consulted the forensic doctor. Dave and his wife made a bag to carry, with rope attached to ensure no part of the body was lost due to salvage problems. In January 2005, 50-year-old Dave flew from Hong Kong to South Africa again. He and his friend Don gathered 7 other experienced divers, including a female diver, Verna Scheik, who had set a Guinness World Record for deep dives. Their salvage plan was to first dive to 271 meters where Dion was, bag him within 5 minutes and start to surface. Don responded at 220 meters underwater, and the others responded at 150 meters and 90 meters in turn. After Dave finished his work, he handed the bag to the others, and then slowly decompressed, stop and floated up, and the others followed suit in turn. He plans to have 35 spare tanks in the water, with a diving physiologist and a doctor on standby for emergencies. The other divers also transported gas cylinders to Dave during his decompression ascent to minimize the risk. For the success of this program, Dave also trained over and over again at the Kamadi Springs Dive Center until he was able to bag objects in the shortest amount of time underwater. Although the plan is well planned, after all, he is salvaging objects at 271 meters underwater. He will stay underwater for 12 hours, and Dave's task is arduous. Dave had a private conversation with his friend on the night before the action. He felt that this action was very difficult, and he was not sure whether he would have an accident. Dave hoped that Don would protect himself and not save him in case something happened. The next day is action day. Can they succeed? January 8, 2005, is a Saturday. At 4 o'clock in the morning, before dawn, 50-year-old Dave and his 8 partners had already woken up and started preparations. They drove to near the entrance to Bushman's Hole. At this time, there were many people gathered at the entrance of the cave, including the police maintaining order, fans who came to cheer, a group of media reporters, and the parents of the victim Dion. At 6:13 in the morning, the local media had set up multiple camera positions on the scene. They will cover the entirety of the salvage operation. The commander-in-chief of the operation is female diver Verna, who will arrange for everyone to dive into the water in sequence. Since Dave would be underwater for 12 hours, he was the first to dive. Before launching into the water, he said to his friend Don, "See you in 20 minutes. It was planned that he would meet Don at 220 meters underwater with Dion in 20 minutes. With that, he entered Bushman's hole and dived to the bottom along the guide rope. 13 minutes after Dave's dive, his friend Don began to dive. After some time, Don reached the planned position 220 meters underwater. After arriving, Don didn't find Dave. Don looked into the depths of the cave and saw a bright light below, probably from Dave's. However, Don was very worried at this time, because the light below did not seem to move. This means that what might happen to Dave makes Don feel bad. Dave had had a private conversation with Don the night before. He don't want Don save him if an accident happens. But at this time Don can't care so much anymore, he must save his friend. So he immediately began to dive deeper into the cave along the guide rope. When he came to 244 meters underwater, a sharp crack suddenly sounded. It turned out that the rebreather's controls were broken, which meant he had to manually inject oxygen into the rebreather and monitor the oxygen levels in the rebreather from time to time. Don knew that if he kept diving, he would be buried here. Don's eyes were wet, he stared down again, the lights just now had gone out, and it was pitch black. Then he began to decompress and ascend along the guide rope. However, even if he decompresses and floats now, he has to stay in the water for at least 10 hours, which may be life-threatening. 29 minutes after Dave was in the water, 2 other divers at the mouth of the cave dived according to plan and came to a depth of 150 meters. According to the plan, Don will arrive at this location to join them after waiting for 4 minutes. But they did not see Don after waiting for a long time. Not only that, but the light in the depths of the cave also disappeared. They took out a waterproof pen and exchanged messages on the whiteboard. They thought the wait had been long enough that it would be dangerous to wait any longer. So they began to decompress and float. At this time, they saw that the light seemed to be lit below, but they had to float up and could not wait any longer. In the process, another diver, named Herbst, entered the cave. The man, a friend of Don, encountered 2 divers in decompression suits as he descended to 84 meters. The 3 communicated using a whiteboard. Herbst learned that there was only a light below and knew that something had happened, and he wanted to rescue. It didn't take long for him to spot Don, who was taking a decompression suit. Don took the whiteboard and wrote on it, "Dave is not coming back." Herbst looked into the depths of the cave for a long time after seeing it, and it was pitch black there. An hour had passed since Dave's dive. A total of 5 divers dived into Bushman's hole. The people at the entrance of the cave don't know what's going on underwater, they're waiting anxiously. It didn't take long for a whiteboard to be handed up with the words, "There are no lights below." 20 minutes later another whiteboard was handed up. This is the whiteboard Don wrote, and the people at the entrance of the cave know that Dave is not coming back. Don's situation is not optimistic. He dived too deep, stayed too long on the bottom, and could develop decompression sickness when he surfaced. Other divers at the mouth of the cave began to rescue Don, and some began to dive. At the same time Don began to go all the way up without thinking about the risk of decompression sickness. When he reached 50 meters underwater, he floated too fast, a helium bubble had formed in his left ear, and he felt dizzy. In a trance, he grabbed a nearby guide rope, so he didn't lose his way. At this time, he continued to decompress and ascended and came to a depth of 46 meters underwater. He felt strong dizziness and nausea. But he did not give up, there was only one belief in his heart, that is to live. He managed to replace a gas cylinder at a spare cylinder storage point and continued to decompress and ascend. Just as he was about to lose his hold, a diver found him. The man quickly checked Don's condition, and he was no longer optimistic. After the other divers at the entrance got the news, they dived to Don's location one after another. At this time, Don would unplug the respirator from time to vomit. The vertigo prevented him from continuing to float up, and several divers clamped on to a guideline to prevent him from convulsing and fainting. Rescue divers also cannot stay in the water for long periods of time, they are inexperienced and need to be replaced every now and then. Due to the lack of manpower, Don had to decompress and ascend alone. After more than 10 hours of Dave's dive, Don, with the help of other divers, reached to 6 meters underwater. At this time, he was exhausted, his body temperature was very low, and his left leg was in severe pain from floating too fast. Fortunately, he got back to the surface with the help of another diver. Don was immediately sent to a decompression chamber for treatment. At this point, news of Dave's death spread. Countless people witnessed the tragedy at Bushman's Hole on television. The crowd at the entrance began to slowly disperse, leaving only the divers of the salvage team. Since Dave's position was 271 meters underwater, none of them had the ability to bring him up, and everyone was at a loss for a while. After adjusting their emotions, they decided to keep Dave in the cave forever. The local police were moved by their story and held a chase meeting for Dave at the entrance of the cave. For the next few days, only the divers who were responsible for finishing the hole remained. They need to get out the spare gas cylinder that was previously underwater, as well as clear the guide rope. 3 days after Dave's death, a diver working underwater suddenly noticed that something stuck 20 m below the water. He dived in to find out that it was Dave. With his arms outstretched, the back of his head and shoulders pressed against the rock wall, next to him is a bag containing Dion. Dave also had some guide ropes wrapped around him, and the diver realized he might have pulled Dave up from the bottom of the water while clearing the underwater guide ropes. The diver immediately returned to the cave to share the news. They quickly worked together to salvage the 2 victims. The camera on Dave's body is intact, and it records the last moments of his life completely. Going back in time to the moment before Dave got into the water, the initial phase after diving into the cave has been smooth. After 11 minutes, he was 271 meters underwater, and he had 5 minutes to find Dion and put him in a bag. After 12 minutes and 22 seconds, he successfully found Dion. A large part of his body was buried in mud. Dave took the bag out and tried to pack Dion. But after he pulled Dion's body out of the mud, the part buried in the mud was not completely skeletonized, so it still had a certain buoyancy. This was an unexpected situation that Dave had never imagined. Dave is getting nervous, his breathing rate is picking up and his movements are slowing down. He tried to bag Dion, but Dion was too buoyant to pack. There are many guide ropes deep, one of them tangled in Dave's lights. To unravel the lights, he took out the knife and tried to cut the guide rope. Dave became a little flustered as the time passed, and his breathing rate continued to increase. At this point, the dive computer has already issued an alarm, and it has been more than half a minute before the planned ascent time. Since he is on a closed-circuit rebreather, steady breathing is required. But Dave was still looking for the guide rope, he was still nervous, his hand had been groping in the dark, the scissors were in the other hand but never cut anything. 10 minutes after Dave reached the bottom of the water, due to the huge water pressure, he stayed for too long, coupled with unstable breathing, Dave gradually lost consciousness. The camera image finally freezes in darkness. After the incident, although Dave's friend Don successfully returned to the ground, he was still diagnosed with severe decompression sickness, his body lost his sense of balance, and left irreversible permanent sequelae. Dion's regret was brought to the surface and back to his family. His parents expressed their gratitude to Dave and all the salvagers and regretted Dave's accident. Over time, Dave's family has gradually come out of grief. Dave's ashes are scattered in the South African Sea, a place he loves. How much Dave loves the sport of diving, he lived up to his promise to bring Dion back to the surface.